Senator Kaine, live in Virginia. I'm in Columbus, Ohio on Radio Row at the Defending the American Dream Summit in Columbus, Ohio at the Convention Center. By the way, the Hokies of Virginia Tech, they opened at home in Blacksburg against Ohio State. I'm looking for another upset, even though a lot of these people here are big Ohio State fans. So I think, look, the Hokies are at home. Blacksburg, right, Senator? Anything can happen.
Indeed, John, and I'm actually in the Blacksburg area right now. I'm doing an event this morning in Radford, just a couple miles south of Blacksburg, and we've had a lot of conversation about Hokie football out here the last couple of days. I've been doing a tour of southern and southwest Virginia that I started Monday down in Hampton Roads and just cruised across Route 58, and I'm in Radford this morning and finish up in Roanoke and Lexington before I head home to Richmond tonight.
I tell you what, it's always fabulous to go out across Virginia. I know when I get an opportunity to visit my different affiliates from Roanoke on down, you get a very different perspective of what's going on. You've had a kind of a whirlwind tour in Virginia Center the past week or so. What are the top 2 or 3 takeaways, the things that you've learned?
You know, John, we kind of had a theme for the week, which was economic development. So we've been doing plant and company visits, whether they're startups or big companies that have been longtime pillars of the community, like ABB down in South Boston, manufactures electric transformers. But we've also been doing a lot of work in the economic development area about workforce. So New College Institute in Martinsville, a fascinating agriculture technical program in Carroll High School in Hillsville yesterday, and this morning I'm actually doing a workforce issue that's got a little bit of a negative tinge to it. I'm in Radford to have a roundtable discussion about the opioid abuse problem. There was a speech yesterday in the event I was at where a guy was talking about how many of potential employees that they'd like to hire can't pass drug tests, and I've heard this from other employers, so we're going to do a roundtable discussion this morning. The topics that people want to talk about, as you might imagine, when I was in the Hampton Roads area, everybody wanted to talk about sequester and will Congress get a budget deal by September 30, or if not, when will we get one? Transportation infrastructure has been a big deal because obviously that's so connected to economic development, maybe especially in Southside and Southwest. And so those are a couple of the issues of significance, and a lot about workforce issues. So that's really been the theme of the week.
Well, look, there's no doubt, Senator Kaine, whenever you get out and talk to people, jobs is always the big issues. It's
yes.
Okay, I've got to give a plug to Governor McAuliffe. I just think he's done a masterful job in bringing jobs and companies into Virginia. I don't think I've ever seen quite the whirlwind of enthusiasm.
Right. I think you're right. I think that's a very fair comment. And I tip my hat. I mean, I was governor in the worst recession since the 1930s, and I was proud of my job creation efforts, relative to the times and relative to other states. But I got to say, Governor McAuliffe is really knocking it out of the park. I was everywhere I've gone. For example, I was at this ABB facility in Halifax the other day, and we did an expansion in '08 there when I was governor. But then, you go over to Danville, you go to Martinsville, they're talking about projects either that they've done with Governor McAuliffe or that they're working on with him now, where they have their fingers crossed that something might happen. So I am hearing some excitement. And I'll tell you, if I can just give a quick plug, John, when you say innovation in Virginia, most people think of Northern Virginia. So here you are, Mecklenburg County, Virginia. Microsoft has what will be the largest data center in the world. They're building out their 6th building, and they will ultimately build many more buildings than that. Largest data center in the world, Microsoft in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. ABB in South Boston manufactures transformers that are used by utilities and municipalities around the world, the market leader in the world. Every transformer they make is different than every other one. It's all unique. It's all kind of handcrafted, these massive transformers. So everywhere we go here in Southside Virginia, which is, as you know, been pretty hit economically in the last 15 years, you're seeing examples of innovation that are exciting and that are creating some real opportunities here. And that's good for me to come and see so I can share that news with my colleagues.
Well, look, it's fabulous to be out and about, and we appreciate you doing that. And I want to tell you that I told the last time he was on the air with me, I told Mr. Trump when he becomes president, he should pick Terry McAuliffe for his Commerce Secretary. So we're going to keep that one. I want to get to the Iran deal.
Absolutely.
Senator, you've come on in favor of it. Two very prominent senators on the Democratic side, Chuck Schumer from New York, Robert Menendez from New Jersey, have come out in opposition to it.
Yep.
Now we're finding out that there's side deals being made that maybe people weren't aware of. What is driving your position on being in favor of this when you've got people on your own side who are saying, this just is a bad deal for America?
Yeah, John, let me talk about my support, and then let me talk about this issue of the side deal. So on my support first, look, people I respect are on both sides of this. So there are some folks that I know who think it's a bad deal, but there's also some folks that, I think you and I both respect who say it's a very strong deal. So, for example, last week, John Warner and Carl Levin, the most immediate past two chairs of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John Warner served for 30 years, Carl Levin for 36 years, wrote an op-ed called Why Hawks Should Support the Iran Deal. And so there are President Bush's ambassador to Israel, Daniel Kurtzer, strong supporter of the Iran deal. Here's why I support it. It is dramatically better than the status quo for 15 years. When you talk about alternatives, that's kind of a hypothetical, so skip the hypotheticals. Let's just talk about the status quo. Mm-hmm. Before we got into the diplomatic negotiations with Iran, we were punishing them with sanctions and hurting their economy, but we weren't stopping their nuclear program. And even Prime Minister Netanyahu acknowledged that when he spoke to the UN in September 2012. He said, we have to face the truth. Our sanctions are hurting their economy, but it's not stopping their nuclear program. So under sanctions, they had built up to 20,000 centrifuges, nearly 12,000 kilograms of enriched uranium, a facility to enrich plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium, and we had very little inspections to really know what they were doing or where they were doing it. Under this deal, they disable two-thirds of their centrifuges. They permanently disable the plutonium facility. They give up 98% of their uranium stockpile, whittling it down to where they don't even have enough uranium for one weapon. And they give us the kinds of inspections that we need to determine, A, if they're cheating, but secondly, and this is pretty important, if we ever have to take military action against Iran because they want to break toward a nuclear weapon, the more inspections we have, the better we are able to target military activity, really take out a nuclear program. So I do understand that, people can reach different conclusions about it. We all want the same thing. We all want an Iran with no nuclear weapons, achieved diplomatically if possible, militarily if necessary, but we got to give the diplomatic option a chance. And if we do, I actually think not only do we have a period of 15 years where they will not be able to move toward nuclear weapon, but we even increase the credibility of any military threat that we might need to maintain against them breaking toward weapon status.
Well, Senator, what about this President Obama and others saying that the Iran nuclear breakout capability is 2 to 3 months? Is that accurate?
That is what Prime Minister Netanyahu said at the UN in September of 2012. And I really view, John, the best statement of the Iranian program, what they were doing, was that speech that the Prime Minister gave a year before we started this diplomatic negotiation with the interim deal in November of 2013. And he basically said they're rocketing ahead on a nuclear program, even though international sanctions are tough, and they are within, he used the phrase, they are within a few weeks or a few months from crossing the nuclear threshold. Is that 2 or 3? Is it 5 or 6? I don't know the answer to the question, but I do know this. I am confident that this deal takes away the ability of Iran to get to nuclear weapons status for 15 years. And then after that, it continues to put significant obstacles in their way. And it holds the international coalition together to both enforce the deal, but then if Iran cheats, to take significant action, even including military action against them if they do.
What about the fact that the lifting the sanctions is going to give them, what some people say, $150 billion of green that they need in order to then go and export terrorism around the Middle East? How do you reconcile
John,
that?
That's a very legitimate concern. So bottom line is the sanctions that have been imposed internationally basically for 9 years have taken a lot of Iranian assets and frozen them. So it's not the West giving them money. This is Iran's own money that we have frozen. And some of it's cash, some of it's like accounts receivable and things like that. The value of it, the book value, may be 120, 130 billion. The actual cash value is probably somewhere between 50 and 100 billion. But the answer is yes. If they have that money, they have a lot of internal domestic needs because their economy has been so punished, but they could use some of it. In fact, you would have to assume realistically that they would use some of it for the activities that they are currently carrying out in Yemen, for example, or in Syria or in Iraq. And that's a reality we have to confront. But I'll tell you, this is not a negotiation about whether an adversary becomes an ally. It's about whether an adversary has a nuclear weapon or not. If we can block Iran for 15 years and possibly more from making that break toward nuclear weapon status, then we can spend all of our energy checking off against their non-nuclear activities. And if they're dangerous without a nuclear weapon, you can imagine how dangerous they are with one. To me, this is very similar to the dynamic that JFK faced when he negotiated the nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union in '63. He was negotiating it with them right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he was heavily criticized for it. You can't do this with these guys. They're the axis of evil, the empire of evil around the world, and it was true. Until the wall fell 25 years later, they were our principal adversary. But right. Kennedy gave that famous speech at American University, and he said, look, even though they're our adversary, we're going to be better off, they're going to be better off, the world's going to be better off if we can reduce the risk of nuclear weapons. And that is what this deal fundamentally is about.
All right, we've only got a couple more minutes with you, Senator Kaine. I want to get to, again, local Virginia, the Obama EPA, this new ozone rule coming out. A lot of people I'm talking to, senators, saying it's going to devastate the economy in Virginia. Over 35,000 jobs are going to go away. Energy costs go up. Can you do anything to stop it?
Well, I will say this, John. I'm very focused on the president's Clean Power Plan, which is a slightly different one that the EPA has just come out with, and we're going to be having hearings about this in the Senate, which is about what can Virginia do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2030. And I actually think after a lot of comments, there was an initial proposal. Senator Warner and I, Governor McAuliffe, all of us made comments about, hey, I think you didn't treat Virginia right in this. I do think the final rule is going to be one that Virginia can live with. I'm digging into the ozone one now, but I'll just say, when President George H.W. Bush did the air regulation to try to reduce mercury acid rain, the same claims were made. It's going to devastate the American economy. It's going to cost, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it actually worked out pretty well. Clean Water Act, same claims were made. I live in a city of Richmond where the James River was a sewer with no fish, no real bird life, and you couldn't swim in it. And now we got bald eagles, active fish, and people can swim and kayak in it all the time. These regulations are always attacked as job killers when they get put on the board. Frequently, that doesn't prove to be true. Nevertheless, you've got to make sure that it strikes the right balance. So on this one, I will probably do what I did with respect to the Clean Power Plan. As we dig into it, if we think that it doesn't strike the right balance, we'll make comments, and hopefully they will make adjustments before the rule goes final. That's what they've done in the Clean Power Plan to Virginia's advantage, and we will approach this the same way.
All right, Senator, we've only got about a half a minute. Final question. VA Accountability Act.
Yeah. Well, look, one year in, John, and since you blast nationwide from Hampton Roads most of the time, you know that the Hampton VA was the worst in the country in terms of waiting list when we passed this act a year ago. So it took you more than 30 days to get a primary care appointment if you were a vet. Worst in the nation. I was there Monday morning, first thing this past Monday. Good news is they've dramatically improved. They've gone to just 7 days, which is right at the national average. But there's still more that needs to be done, and in fact, some of it we got to do in Washington. I'll just close with, here's a weird thing about the VA right now. The Portsmouth Naval Hospital just across the water. If the VA wants to get a DOD doctor from Portsmouth Naval Hospital to come over and treat patients, they can't because they're not qualified and credentialed in the VA system, even though they're fully qualified and credentialed in the DOD. They have to go through an elaborate process to qualify these DOD doctors who could just drive from Portsmouth to Hampton and help veterans out. And so we need to get rid of obstacles and barriers like that so that the medical professionals that are already serving our active duty can come over and help out in VAs. And this is a very common thing. This isn't just a Hampton Roads issue. There's some personnel issues, and a report just came out the other day talking about how difficult it is for the VA to hire. They have to go through 18 different steps before they hire medical professionals. We've got to make that simpler. That's not something that a hospital director can do without some significant leadership from Secretary McDonald and Congress.
All right, that's going to be the final word. We want to thank Senator Tim Kaine for being with us today, Democrat from Virginia. Hey, Senator, it's always an honor to have you on. Thank you so much.
All right.
Sir.
Hey, go Hokies.